Membranes in the human body are flat sheets of pliable tissue that cover or line a body part. We'll look at two major categories of membranes. The epithelial membranes consist of an epithelial layer and an underlying connective tissue layer. These epithelial membranes include mucous membranes, serous membranes, and the cutaneous membrane, also called the skin. Your synovial membranes line joints, are filled with synovial fluid, and contain only connective tissues. So let's begin by looking at the epithelial membranes. The mucous membranes, also called mucosa, line cavities that are open to the external environment, such as your gastrointestinal tract. The epithelial layer of mucous membranes is an important aspect of the body's defense mechanism because it acts as a barrier to pathogens and traps those pathogens and bacteria and waste products in that mucus so that we can get rid of it. So mucus is very sticky, and here you can see the epithelial layer attached to the connective tissue layer. You can also see these unicellular mucus secreting glands known as goblet cells. So the goblet cells secrete mucus here onto the free surface, and then things get trapped in that mucus so we can get rid of it. You also have mucous membranes that line your nasal cavity, and that is what secretes the mucus, or what we commonly call snot in the nose, right? So what does it do? It traps things that get in there, the dust particles and bacteria and different things that get in, so that we can easily get it back outside of the body. Your serous membranes, or serosa, line a body cavity that doesn't open directly to the exterior and covers organs that lie within that cavity. Some examples of that include the pleura, which covers the lungs, the pericardium, which covers and surrounds the heart, and the peritoneum, which covers and surrounds the abdominal cavity and the organs. So let's look a little bit more at these. Now remember, we've got an epithelial layer that's going to be bound to a basal lamina, or your basement membrane there, and then you've got that membrane connected to or attached to the underlying connective tissue. So serous membranes, remember, line cavities not open directly to the outside. So we can further subdivide those serous membranes into two layers. So think for just a moment about putting your hand into an inflated balloon. So here you can see where the balloon is tied. So we're just shoving our fist down into the balloon. Part of that balloon is going to line your fist, and part of that balloon is going to be out here on the outside of the balloon wall, and then there's a space between. So that's the same idea with the serous membranes. They cover the inner walls of cavities and also the outer surface of the organs. So when we look at this, you can see that there's really two different layers. There's a parietal and a visceral layer of that membrane. So parietal serous membranes are always going to line body cavities. Visceral, viscera refers to organ, so visceral serous membranes line the surface of the organ. The space between those two is the cavity. So you can think of cavity as just a space. So let's think instead if this were the heart instead of the fist. So the heart would be the viscera, the organ. So on the surface of the heart, the serous membrane would be the visceral pericardium, pericardy around the heart. Lining the cavity the heart is in would be the parietal pericardium, the serous membrane that lines the cavity around the heart. And then between those two, you would have a fluid-filled space known as the pericardial cavity. So this idea is the same whether it's the pericardium, the visceral or the membranes that surround the heart, the pleura, the visceral membrane or the visceral and parietal membranes that surround the lungs, or the peritoneum, the visceral and parietal membranes that surround the abdominal organs. Continuing to look at our epithelial membranes, the skin is known as the cutaneous membrane. So this is a membrane that covers the outer surface of the body. It's composed of two major layers. The epidermis, which is the most superficial layer, this is what you see, the outer part of the skin, which is made of many, many, many sublayers of stratified squamous epithelial cells. Now, what does that term tell you? Stratified, many layers, squamous, flat. Okay? Then the dermis is the deeper layer where we find the hair follicles and the sweat glands and lots of blood vessels. So the dermis is made up of lots of areolar and dense irregular connective tissues. You may also hear of the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer. This is not really a layer of the cutaneous membrane or of the skin. By definition, hypodermis or subcutaneous means below the cutaneous or below the dermis. So it's not really a part of the skin, but you will often study it when you're studying the skin. And in the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer, there's lots and lots and lots of adipose tissue. All right, so remember, your mucous, serous, and cutaneous membranes are made up of those epithelial cells, epithelial tissues, anchored to or connected to the underlying connective tissue. Your synovial membranes line joints and contain only connective tissues. So these are going to be lining joint cavities, contain or line also the bursa and the tendon sheaths. They don't contain epithelium. They secrete a fluid known as synovial fluid. Okay, so here you can see a joint. Here's the joint cavity, and the synovial membrane lining that cavity secretes fluid into that cavity, which keeps bone from grinding against bone as those joints are moving. Also, some of the common synovial joints are your knee, your elbow, your hip, your shoulder, and of course we'll study those synovial joints more when we get into the skeletal system and we're looking at those bones and how they articulate together and the structures that are found within there. Synovial, synovi, with egg. So syn means with, ova refers to egg. So the consistency of the synovial fluid that's in there is very clear and extremely slippery, so it's very much like egg white, and that's where the name for that came from.